The year was 2347, and humanity had become the most respected species in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest, not because they had the biggest ships or the deadliest weapons. They were respected because they had chosen peace. For 200 years, humans had worked as diplomats, teachers, and healers across the stars. They helped end wars between species that had been fighting for thousands of years. They shared their knowledge freely. They welcomed strangers into their homes. The other species in the galaxy had many words for humans. The Torvaki called them the Gentle Ones. Nexari called them the Bridge Builders. But behind closed doors, many species had another word for them. Weak Commander Daniel Price stood on the bridge of his ship, the Horizon's Edge. It was not a warship. It was a diplomatic vessel, designed to carry ambassadors and aid workers to places that needed help. Daniel had served on this ship for 15 years, and he had never fired a weapon in anger. He was proud of that fact. The ship was orbiting a beautiful blue and green, a world called New Eden. It was one of humanity's largest colonies, home to 3 million people. Most of them were farmers and teachers. They had come to this distant world to build a peaceful life away from the crowded cities of Earth. Children played in parks under an alien sun. Families gathered for dinners in homes they had built with their own hands. It was everything humanity had hoped the future could be. Lieutenant Maria Santos sat at the communications station. She was young, only 26 years old, and she had joined the diplomatic service because she believed in humanity's mission of peace. She was checking routine messages when the first signal came through. Her face went pale. Her hands started to shake. "Commander," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We're receiving distress calls from New Eden." Daniel walked over to her station. "What kind of distress calls?" Maria looked up at him with tears forming in her eyes. "All of them, sir. Every city, every settlement, they're all calling for help at the same time." Before Daniel could respond, the main screen flickered to life. A face appeared. It belonged to a Valkyrie, one of the warrior species that had always resented humanity's influence in the Galactic Council. The Valkyrie were tall, with gray skin and eyes that burned like hot coals. They had built their entire civilization around war and conquest. The Valkyrie on the screen was smiling, "People of Earth," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "For too long, you have spread your weakness across this galaxy. You have convinced others that peace is strength. You have made warriors forget how to fight. Today, we remind the galaxy what true strength looks like." The image changed. Daniel saw New Eden from orbit. Bright flashes of light were appearing across the surface. Each flash was a weapon strike. Each flash was thousands of lives ending in an instant. Maria was crying now. Other crew members had gathered around the screen, watching in horror. Some fell to their knees. Others simply stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The Valkyrie commander's face returned to the screen. "We have used weapons that your pathetic treaties banned long ago. We targeted your schools first, then your hospitals, then your homes. 3 million of your kind will die today, and there is nothing you can do about it. This is what happens when the weak try to lead the strong." The transmission ended. Daniel stood perfectly still for a long moment. He had dedicated his entire life to the belief that talking could solve any problem. He had believed that if you just listened to your enemies, you could find common ground. He had believed that violence was never the answer. He turned to Maria. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them what has happened. Tell them," he paused, searching for words that felt completely inadequate. "Tell them everything." On Earth, in the city of Geneva, Admiral Catherine Webb received the message. She was 68 years old and had spent her entire career in the diplomatic fleet. She had personally negotiated 17 ceasefires. She had stopped 3 wars before they started. She had shaken hands with leaders of 100 different species and called many of them friends. She watched the footage from the surviving satellites above New Eden. She saw the cities burning. She saw the agricultural domes collapsing. She saw the tiny figures of people running and then falling and then not moving anymore. Her aide, a young man named Peter, stood nearby. "Admiral, The Galactic Council is requesting a statement. They want to know how humanity plans to respond. Catherine did not answer right away. She was looking at one particular image. It showed a school building, or what was left of one. The walls had been torn open by weapons fire. Inside, she could see small desks scattered like broken toys, small chairs, small bodies. Something changed inside Admiral Catherine Webb in that moment. Something that had been built over 200 years of peace and diplomacy and hope. It did not break. It did not shatter. It simply went away, like a candle being blown out. "Contact the United Earth Assembly," she said. Her voice was calm and steady, which somehow made it more frightening than if she had been screaming. "Tell them to convene an emergency session. All representatives, all military commanders, all colony leaders. Everyone." Peter nodded. "What should I tell them is the purpose of the meeting?" Catherine turned to face him. Her eyes, which had always been warm and kind, now looked like two pieces of cold stone. "Tell them that the civilized humans died on New Eden today. Tell them that something else is waking up. Something we tried very hard to forget we were." Peter swallowed hard. "And what is that, Admiral?" Catherine looked back at the image of the destroyed school one more time. She thought about the children who had been inside. She thought about their parents, who would never hold them again. She thought about the Valkyrie commander's smiling face. "Predators," she said quietly. "We tried to become something better. We tried to evolve past our nature. And for 200 years, we succeeded. But the Valkyrie just reminded us of what we really are. Deep down, under all the civilization and the diplomacy and the kindness," she began walking toward the door. "Where are you going, Admiral?" Peter asked. Catherine paused at the doorway. "To wake up the wolves. God help anyone who gets in our way." That night, messages went out across human space. They were short and simple. They contained only 3 words that humanity had not spoken in 2 centuries: prepare for war, and somewhere in the darkness between stars. The Valkyrie celebrated their victory, completely unaware that they had just made the worst mistake in the history of their species. They thought they had killed 3 million helpless civilians. They thought they had proven that humanity was weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The United Earth Assembly Hall was the largest building in Geneva. It had been designed to hold representatives from every nation on Earth and every human colony across the stars. Tonight, every seat was filled. Nobody was missing. Nobody had made excuses. When the call went out, everyone came. President Marcus Hall stood at the central podium. He was 55 years old, a former professor who had written books about peaceful conflict resolution. His hands were trembling as he gripped the edges of the podium. He had not slept since the news from New Eden arrived. Nobody had. "I have received a communication from the Galactic Council," he began. His voice echoed through the silent chamber. "They have expressed their condolences for our loss. They have proposed forming a committee to investigate the attack. This investigation would take approximately 18 months to complete." A low sound of anger rippled through the crowd. 18 months. 3 million dead, and the galaxy wanted to form a committee. "The Valkyr Empire has released a statement," Marcus continued. "They claim that the attack was a necessary response to human interference in galactic affairs. They say that we provoked them by spreading our ideas of peace and cooperation. They say that we deserved what happened." The anger in the room grew louder. Representatives who had spent their careers promoting calm discussion were now clenching their fists. Diplomats who had never raised their voices were now red-faced with rage. General Patricia Moore stood up from her seat. She was 73 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of service. She had never commanded a ship in combat. Nobody in the human military had. Their job had been peacekeeping and rescue operations. Nothing more. "Permission to address the assembly," she said. President Hall nodded. "Granted." Patricia walked slowly to the podium. She moved with the careful steps of someone who knows that every word they speak will change history. 200 years ago, she began, our ancestors made a choice. They looked at the galaxy and saw species tearing each other apart. They saw endless wars and countless deaths. And they decided that humanity would be different. We would show the galaxy a better way. She paused, letting the words sink in. We dismantled our war fleets. We converted our weapons factories into schools and hospitals. We trained our soldiers to be peacekeepers instead of warriors. We taught our children that violence was the tool of the uncivilized. We became exactly what we promised to be. Peaceful, reasonable, kind. Patricia's voice hardened. And because of that, the Valkyrie thought we were weak. They looked at our empty warships and our peaceful colonies, and they saw prey. They murdered 3 million of our people, including children, because they believed we would respond with nothing but words. She turned to face the assembly directly. My grandmother served in the last war that humanity ever fought. It was against ourselves before we went to the stars. She used to tell me stories about what humans were capable of when pushed too far. She said that we became peaceful not because we were incapable of violence, but because we knew exactly how violent we could be. We chose peace because we were afraid of what we might become if we did not. Patricia walked to the main display screen and began pulling up old files. Images appeared that nobody in the room had seen before. Ship designs that looked nothing like the gentle diplomatic vessels they were used to. These ships were covered in weapons. They had sharp angles and dark colors. They looked like predators. These are the designs our ancestors locked away 2 centuries ago, Patricia said. They hoped they would never be needed again. They hoped that humanity had evolved past such things. She pulled up more files. Training manuals for soldiers. Tactical doctrines for warfare. Psychological profiles designed to break enemy morale. All of it had been sealed away and forgotten. We did not forget how to fight, Patricia said. We chose not to fight. There is a difference. And now, I am asking this assembly to make a different choice. President Hall spoke up. What exactly are you proposing, General? Patricia turned to face him. I am proposing that we remember who we were before we became civilized. I am proposing that we open the sealed archives and rebuild what we destroyed. I am proposing that we show the Valkyrie and the entire galaxy that humanity's kindness was a gift we gave freely, not a weakness that could be exploited. The chamber erupted in noise. Some representatives were shouting their support. Others were expressing concern. But beneath all the noise, there was a current of something that had not been felt in human politics for 200 years. Rage, Admiral. Catherine Webb stood up. The room went quiet. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone respected her. And everyone had seen the change in her eyes since New Eden. I have served peace my entire life, Catherine said. I believed in it. I still believe in it. But peace requires 2 parties who are willing to talk. The Valkyrie are not willing to talk. They are willing to kill. They are willing to murder children to make a point. She walked down to stand beside General Moore. If we respond with only words, they will do this again. If we form committees and write reports, they will laugh at us and attack another colony. The only language they understand is force. And so, for the first time in 2 centuries, humanity must speak that language. President Hall looked out at the assembly. He could see the answer in their faces. The vote was almost unnecessary. But he called for it anyway, because that was how civilized people did things. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. That night, the factories woke up. Across Earth in every human colony, machines that had been silent for generations began to move. Workers who had only ever built farming equipment were now reading instructions for constructing warships. Scientists who had studied biology and physics were now designing weapons. The military academies, which had become museums displaying the artifacts of humanity's violent past, reopened their doors. Young people who had never imagined they would fight in a war lined up to volunteer and deepen the most secure archives of Earth's command. A team of historians and military experts gathered around a file that had not been opened in 200 years. The label on the file was simple: Total War Doctrine. The oldest member of the team, a historian named Samuel Green, looked at the file with something like fear in his eyes. Are we sure about this? He asked. Once we open this, there is no going back. We will become something we swore never to be again. Catherine Webb stepped forward and placed her hand on the file. The Valkyrie made this choice for us, she said. They wanted to wake up the monster that humanity buried 2 centuries ago. Now they will meet it. She opened the file, and across the galaxy, without knowing why, the Valkyrie suddenly felt cold. The Valkyrie High Command celebrated their victory for 3 weeks straight. Every night brought new feasts and new speeches praising the commanders who had destroyed New Eden. The Emperor himself declared a new holiday to commemorate the day they had humiliated humanity. Other species sent messages of congratulations, some because they truly approved, others because they were afraid of what the Valkyrie might do to them next. Ambassador Derek Cole watched these celebrations from his office on Nexus Prime, a neutral space station where diplomats from all species gathered. He was 60 years old and had spent 20 years working alongside alien diplomats. He had always believed that understanding could bridge any gap between species. Now, watching the Valkyrie laugh about murdering children, he was not so sure. His assistant, a young woman named Lisa Park, entered his office with a worried look on her face. "Sir, something strange is happening in human space." Derek turned away from the celebration footage. "What kind of strange?" "Complete radio silence. Every civilian channel has gone dark. Every diplomatic frequency is dead. The only transmissions coming through are encrypted using codes we have never seen before." Derek frowned. "How long has this been going on?" 3 days now. And there is more." Lisa handed him a datapad. "The merchant ships that were in human territory when the blackout started have all been escorted to the border and told to leave. They were not given any explanation, just told to go and not come back." This was unusual. Humans had always been the most welcoming species in the galaxy. Their ports were open to everyone. Their markets traded with any species willing to deal fairly. For them to suddenly close their borders was unheard of. Over the next few weeks, more strange reports came in. Mining operations on asteroids that had been abandoned for decades were suddenly active again. Transport ships were moving massive amounts of materials to locations that nobody could identify. Human workers were leaving their jobs at alien companies and returning to human space without explanation. The Valkyrie heard these reports and laughed. They believed the humans were running away, hiding from the superior species that had finally put them in their place. They sent scout ships to investigate the activity in human space. The scout ships did not return at first. The Valkyrie assumed it was equipment failure. Then they sent more scouts. None of them came back. No distress calls. No final messages. They simply vanished as soon as they crossed into human territory. Derek Cole tried to contact his superiors on Earth. He received only one message in return. It came from Admiral Webb herself, and it contained only 4 words. "Recall all diplomatic personnel." Within days, every human in the galaxy began moving toward Earth. Scientists abandoned research stations mid-experiment. Teachers left their classrooms without saying goodbye to their students. Doctors finished treating their current patients and then packed their bags. Engineers, merchants, artists, workers of every kind, all of them heading home. Derek supervised the evacuation of the human diplomatic staff from Nexus Prime. He watched as young diplomats who had dreamed of building bridges between species carried boxes of personal items onto transport ships. Many of them were crying. They did not understand why they had to leave. One young diplomat, a man named Kevin Torres, stopped beside Derek before boarding his ship. "Do you know what is happening, sir?" Kevin asked. "Why are we abandoning everything we built?" Derek looked out at the stars, toward the direction of human space. "I think we are not abandoning anything. I think we are preparing. Preparing for what?" Derek did not answer. He did not have the words. Within a month, human space was empty of humans. Every colony, every outpost, every station, all abandoned. Ships had been moved. Equipment had been packed. It was as if 300 years of human presence in the galaxy had simply evaporated. The Galactic Council called emergency meetings to discuss the situation. Some species worried that humans were planning mass suicide out of grief. Others suggested that they had found a way to flee the galaxy entirely. The Valkyrie representatives laughed at all these theories. "They are cowards," the Valkyrie ambassador declared. "They have run away to their little corner of space to cry about their dead." In a few years, they will come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and offering to serve us. But then, something even stranger happened. The transmissions from human space stopped entirely. No signals of any kind. No communications, no navigation beacons, no energy signatures. The entire region of space that humanity called home went completely dark. Sensors could not penetrate it. Probes that were sent to investigate simply stopped transmitting the moment they crossed the border. It was as if human space had ceased to exist. 6 months passed. The galaxy slowly forgot about humanity. Other concerns took priority. Wars between other species flared up and died down. Trade routes shifted. Politics moved on. The Volcari continued to celebrate their victory and began making plans to colonize the abandoned human worlds. They started with New Eden. It seemed fitting to them. They would rebuild the planet they had destroyed, but this time it would be a Valkyrie world. A monument to their triumph. A colonization fleet of 50 ships entered human space. Heading for New Eden, the fleet was never heard from again. The Valkyrie sent a second fleet, larger this time. 100 ships, including warships for protection. Gone. A third fleet. 200 ships, nothing. Now the Valkyrie were worried. They gathered their military leaders and demanded answers. How could 3 fleets simply vanish? There had been no battles, no distress calls, no evidence of any kind. And then the transmissions began. They appeared on every screen in Valkyrie space, every communication device, every display, every monitor, all of them showing the same thing. Faces, human faces, 3 million of them, one after another. Each face appeared with a name and a brief description. A 5-year-old girl who loved to draw pictures of flowers, a grandfather who had taught his grandchildren to fish in the rivers of New Eden, a mother who had been pregnant with twins, a teacher who had dedicated her life to helping slow learners succeed. The broadcast lasted for 72 hours. Nobody could turn it off. Nobody could block it. The faces of the dead filled every screen in the Empire without pause. When the faces finally stopped, a new message appeared. You wanted us to remember what we were. We remember. You wanted to teach us a lesson? We have learned. Now it is your turn. The message ended, and in the darkness between stars, something began to move toward Valkyrie space. Something that had been building in silence for 6 months. Something born of grief and rage and 200 years of suppressed instincts. The wolves were coming, and they were hungry. The Valkyrie Emperor summoned his war council when the 17th fleet disappeared. 17 fleets, each one larger than the last, had entered human space and never returned. No distress signals. No survivors. No wreckage. They simply ceased to exist. The council chamber was filled with the highest-ranking military commanders in the Empire. These were Valkyrie who had fought in dozens of wars, who had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions. None of them had any explanation for what was happening. Perhaps they have developed some new weapon, suggested one admiral. Something that destroys ships instantly without leaving any trace. Impossible, another commander replied. The humans were peaceful. They had no military research programs. They spent their resources on hospitals and schools. Then explain where our fleets are going, the Emperor demanded. His voice was sharp with frustration and fear. 17 fleets, thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, all gone. Nobody had an answer. The next morning, the attack began. Ships emerged from subspace around the outer Valkyrie colonies. But they were not like any ships the galaxy had ever seen. They did not have the smooth, elegant lines of human diplomatic vessels. They did not have the bulky, practical shapes of human cargo ships. These vessels were something else entirely. They were black, darker than the space around them. Their shapes were angular and predatory, like the teeth of some enormous beast. Every surface was covered with weapons. There were no windows, no observation decks, no areas designed for comfort. These ships had been built with a single purpose in mind: destruction. Admiral. Catherine Webb stood on the bridge of the lead ship. It was called the Requiem, and it was the largest warship ever built by human hands. Catherine had spent the last 6 months overseeing its construction, along with hundreds of others like it. She had not slept more than 4 hours in any single night. None of them had. Admiral, said her tactical officer, a young man named Paul Carter. Valkyrie Defensive Fleet is moving to intercept. Catherine looked at the display screen. The Valkyrie had assembled an impressive force. 300 warships, veterans of many conflicts, arranged in perfect formation. They were confident. They were professional. They had no idea what they were facing. Open a channel to the Valkyrie commander, Catherine ordered. The Valkyrie commander appeared on screen. He was tall and proud, his gray face set in an expression of contempt. "Human vessel," he said. "You are outnumbered and outmatched. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated with mercy." Catherine smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Mercy," she repeated. "Like the mercy you showed the children of New Eden." The Valkyrie commander's expression flickered, just for a moment. "That was a necessary military action. You forced us to demonstrate our strength." "No," Catherine said. "That was murder. And now you will pay for it." She cut the communication and turned to her tactical officer. "All ships, engage." The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 11 minutes. The human ships moved faster than anything the Valkyrie had ever encountered. Their weapons punched through Valkyrie shields like they were made of paper. Their tactics were brutal and efficient, targeting engines first to prevent escape, then weapons to eliminate resistance, then life support to force surrender. The Valkyrie fought back with everything they had. Their weapons struck the human ships, but the black armor absorbed the blasts without visible damage. Their missiles exploded harmlessly against shields that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Nothing they did had any effect. When it was over, the entire Valkyrie defensive fleet was either destroyed or disabled. Not a single human ship had been lost. General Patricia Moore led the ground forces. She had spent 6 months training soldiers who had never expected to fight. She had turned peacekeepers into warriors, teachers into officers, doctors into combat medics. Now she watched them pour out of landing craft onto Valkyrie soil. The soldiers wore armor that had been specifically designed to be terrifying. It was black and angular, like the ships. The helmets had no visible eyes, just smooth, dark surfaces that reflected nothing. The Valkyrie soldiers who faced them did not see humans. They saw monsters from their worst nightmares. The first Valkyrie world fell in 6 hours. The second fell in 4. By the time the human forces reached the third world, something had changed. The Valkyrie soldiers were not fighting back with their usual ferocity. They were afraid. Word had spread about what was coming. Stories of black ships that could not be stopped. Stories of soldiers that fought without mercy and without pause. The Valkyrie. Government sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council begging for intervention. They invoked every treaty, every accord, every diplomatic agreement that existed. Many of these treaties had been written by humans. "Please," the Valkyrie ambassador pleaded to the council. "They are not following the rules of civilized warfare. They are not accepting surrenders. They are not allowing evacuation of civilians." Ambassador Derek Cole, who had been called back from retirement to represent humanity at the council, stood to respond. "You are correct," he said calmly. "We are not following the rules of civilized warfare. You taught us that those rules do not matter. You showed us on New Eden that civilians are acceptable targets. You demonstrated that schools and hospitals are legitimate military objectives. We have simply learned from your example." The Valkyrie ambassador's face went pale. "That was different. You were weak. You needed to be taught a lesson." Derek's voice grew cold. "We were not weak. We were restrained. There is a difference. For 200 years, humanity chose to be peaceful. We chose to build instead of destroy. We chose to heal instead of hurt. But that was a choice, not a limitation. And now we have made a different choice." He turned to address the entire council. "You all watched as the Valkyrie murdered 3 million of our people. You offered condolences and proposed committees. You did nothing. So now you will watch as we respond in the only way the galaxy seems to understand. Admiral Webb broadcast a message. To every Valkyrie world that remained, he wanted the civilized humans to die on New Eden. Congratulations, they did. We are what remains. We are what you created. We are going to tear your empire apart piece by piece, and when we are finished, no one in this galaxy will ever again mistake our kindness for weakness. The war continued. World after world fell to the human advance. The Valkyrie, who had built their civilization on war and conquest, found themselves facing an enemy that fought with a cold, methodical fury they had never imagined possible. They had thought humans were prey. They discovered too late that they were wrong. The humans were not prey. The humans were predators who had simply chosen not to hunt. Until now, the war lasted 3 months. In that time, the Valkyrie Empire, which had dominated its region of space for over 1,000 years, completely collapsed. Their mighty war fleets were scattered or destroyed. Their conquered territories broke away and declared independence. Their military, which had been the source of all their power and pride, was reduced to nothing. Human forces did not occupy Valkyrie worlds. They did not take slaves, or demand tribute, or install puppet governments. They simply dismantled every military installation, every weapons factory, every shipyard capable of building warships, and left. The Valkyrie people were allowed to live, but they would never again have the ability to threaten anyone. The Emperor of the Valkyrie, who had once laughed at the destruction of New Eden, surrendered personally to Admiral Catherine Webb aboard the Requiem. He expected to be executed. He expected torture and humiliation. He expected the kind of treatment his own people had given to defeated enemies for centuries. Instead, Catherine simply looked at him with cold eyes and said, "Go home. Rebuild your civilization. Teach your children to grow food and build houses and care for the sick. Teach them that war is not glorious. Teach them what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness." The Emperor stared at her in confusion. "You are letting me live." "We are not like you," Catherine replied. "We never were. We tried to show you a better way, and you responded by murdering our children. Now you will spend the rest of your life knowing that we could have destroyed you completely, but we chose not to. That is the difference between us." She turned away from him. "Now get off my ship." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss what they called the human problem. Representatives from dozens of species filled the assembly hall, all of them nervous, all of them frightened. They had watched a species they considered peaceful and weak destroy one of the most powerful military empires in the galaxy in less than 90 days. Many of them demanded action. They wanted sanctions against humanity. They wanted restrictions on human expansion. They wanted some kind of guarantee that what happened to the Valkyrie would not happen to them. Ambassador Derek Cole stood before them, his face calm and patient. "You want to discuss proportionate response?" he said. "Very well. 3 million civilians were murdered by the Valkyrie. By the standards of ancient Earth warfare, proportionate response would have been the complete extinction of the Valkyrie species. Every man, woman, and child. Every world burned to ash. Every trace of their civilization erased from history." The chamber went silent. "Instead, we destroyed only their ability to wage war. Their people live. Their culture continues. Their children will grow up in peace because they will never again have the means to hurt anyone." Derek paused, letting his words sink in. "That is the mercy of civilized humans. Would you like to see what we are capable of when we stop being civilized?" A Torvaki representative spoke up nervously. "Are you threatening us?" Derek shook his head. "No, I am explaining something that you should have understood long ago. Humanity chose peace. We chose diplomacy. We chose to build and create and heal. But those were choices, not limitations. We are capable of terrible things. Our history is filled with wars and atrocities that would make your worst nightmares seem pleasant." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. we buried that part of ourselves. We locked it away and tried to forget it existed. The Valkyrie dug it up. They reminded us of what we really are, and now we will have to live with that knowledge for the rest of our existence. Humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council that day. They returned to their own space and began rebuilding. New Eden was reconstructed not as a farming colony, but as a memorial. 3 million names were carved into walls of black stone that stretched for miles. Gardens were planted around the walls. Schools were built nearby so that children could learn about what had happened and why it could never be allowed to happen again. Admiral Wu. Catherine Webb retired to a small house near the memorial. She spent her days tending a garden and reading books and trying to find peace. It was not easy. She still saw the faces of the dead when she closed her eyes. She still heard the Valkyrie commander laughing in her dreams. General Patricia Moore visited her one evening. As the sun was setting over the memorial walls, "The council is terrified of us," Patricia said, settling into a chair beside her old friend. "They think this is the beginning of human domination of the galaxy." Catherine shook her head slowly. "They do not understand. We do not want to dominate anyone. We never did. We just wanted to be left in peace. Then what do we want?" Catherine looked out at the memorial, at the millions of names carved in stone. Families were walking among the walls, leaving flowers and photographs and small personal items. Children were reading the names aloud, learning who these people had been. "We want what we have always wanted," Catherine said. "Peace. Prosperity. A galaxy where children can grow up without fear, where people can build lives and families and communities without worrying about being destroyed by someone stronger." She paused, her eyes distant. "But now the galaxy knows what we are capable of. Now they know what we were trying so hard not to be. We spent 200 years convincing ourselves that we had evolved past violence, that we had become something better. The Valkyrie proved that we were lying to ourselves." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Do you think we can go back to who we were before?" Catherine thought about the question for a long time. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "We have remembered things that we tried to forget. We have built weapons that we swore never to build again. We have trained soldiers and written battle plans and learned to think like predators instead of prey." She turned to face Patricia directly. "But we can try. We can teach our children kindness and patience and diplomacy, just like we did before. We can encourage them to build and create and heal. We can show them that violence is always the last resort, never the first. And if someone attacks us again," Patricia asked, "if another species decides that we are weak and easy to destroy?" Admiral Catherine Webb looked back at the memorial. The names of the dead seemed to glow in the fading sunlight. 3 million people who had done nothing wrong? 3 million people who had trusted that the galaxy was safe. "Then we will remind them why it is a terrible mistake to make us angry," she said quietly. "We will never forget how to fight. We will never again let ourselves become helpless, but we will always try peace first. We will always offer our hand in friendship before we raise our fist in anger." She stood up and began walking toward the memorial. Patricia followed her. "We are not monsters," Catherine continued. "We proved that when we did not destroy the Valkyrie completely. We are not saints either. We proved that when we destroyed their empire without mercy. We are something in between, something complicated, something that the galaxy had never seen before." They stopped in front of the section of the wall that listed the children who had died. Hundreds of thousands of names, each one representing a life cut short. "We are human," Catherine said softly. "We are capable of great love and terrible anger. We can build civilizations and tear them down. We can heal the sick and kill the healthy. We contain multitudes, as one of our ancient poets once wrote." She reached out and touched one of the names carved into the stone. A 6-year-old girl who had loved butterflies. The galaxy wanted to know what humanity really was. Now they know. "We are the species that chose peace when we could have chosen war. We are the species that built bridges when we could have built weapons. We are the species that extended our hand in friendship to anyone willing to take it." Catherine's voice grew harder. "And we are the species that will burn entire empires to thee." Ground if anyone ever threatens our children again? She turned away from the wall and walked toward the new settlement that was growing nearby. Humans were building homes again, planting gardens, raising families, starting over. We will be civilized again, she said over her shoulder, but we will never forget, and neither will anyone else. In the years that followed, humanity returned to its place among the stars. They reopened their borders to trade and travel. They resumed their work as diplomats and teachers and healers. They helped end conflicts and build alliances and spread knowledge. But they kept the shipyards running. And in the darkness between stars, the black ships waited, silent, patient, ready, just in case anyone else needed to learn the lesson that the Valkyrie had learned too late. Humanity was kind. Humanity was peaceful. Humanity was civilized, but only by choice. And that made all the difference.